Last week, the World Health Organization observed a Mental Health Day, and the theme was mental health at work. It highlighted that safe, healthy working environments can act as a protective factor for mental health. Just last week, a young police officer in Johannesburg committed suicide allegedly due to bullying at the workplace. Let's get more on this now and how to cope with work stress from Dr Keitumetse Mashego, a clinical psychologist. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Mashego. We always, joke about the fact that corporate culture is so toxic that it will drive you to take extreme measures. But the reality actually is that it will, and that some environments do lead to long-term stress that affects one's mental health, which manifests into physical health. What are the most common signs of work-related stress do you think are out there?
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to the listeners. What usually presents as stress is usually physical symptoms without the physical cause. So you get people who are having somatic complaints continually, such as stomach problems or, headaches that are never ending, or, even things like your biological things or natural things that are not happening, like sleep, disruption in appetite, disruption in, just someone feeling comfortable in their skin. So those are some of the symptoms in that they present as stress, but stress over time can lead to what we call burnout, where someone really has nothing left to give. So with stress, it's different to burnout in that when someone is stressed, they can sort of see some light at the end of the tunnel and how to get out of situation or think about ways to cope. But with burnout, it's where someone feels like they have nothing left to give. And when someone is burnout, usually, that's where it's not necessarily a mental health disorder, but it requires significant attention in that it can co-occur with things like your anxiety and depression as well.
And I want to stay on that point of burnout. How does it present itself? And more importantly, what are some of the things that you need to do before you actually get to that point?
Sadly, in the work environment, whatever it is that we haven't dealt with, we bring to the office. So even the employers are going through things that they're not dealing with, that they're sometimes projecting, or because of the expectations, from the executive, they also have their own things. So you also get people just in the workplace carrying whatever it is that they carry that they haven't dealt with, whether it's traumas or, financial problems, emotional stress. People carry whatever it is that they haven't dealt with them all the time. So that mixed with a lot of work stress can lead to what we term burnout. And this is where, as I said, someone really feels like they have nothing left to give. So they feel like they are running on empty, and it could lead to them, for example, withdrawing. Not when they wake up in the morning, they don't look forward to going to work. When they are at work, maybe before they were productive, nowadays they just cannot be productive. There's poor concentration, just constant fatigue, just even the cognitions or the things that they say or think about, they just seem like it's all doom and gloom. So it can present as if it's depression, but it's not the same as depression because of its severity. But nonetheless, it does require attention in that the person feels so hopeless and helpless, and as if they have nothing left to give. They see no way out of that situation.
And to what extent then, because you mentioned the employer, to what extent does, workplace culture play a role in exacerbating, some of the stressful situations? Because on the one hand, you have this young police officer who's being bullied at work who then commits suicide. You also have these highly stressful environments where people need to meet certain targets, from sales teams, etc., that might also then experience these feelings of mental health. So how big a role is then work culture?
Definitely work culture plays a role where people, you tend to see a trend where people are not coping, and also because people are not the same. We get people who are more resilient than others. Some are predisposed to mental health challenges, some are not. So we need to understand that just because one person is coping in a toxic environment doesn't mean that, others will cope as well. So we need to understand that a toxic environment can exacerbate mental health challenges, but they will not necessarily present in everyone, in that people are wired differently, but a toxic environment or an unhealthy work environment can definitely, exacerbate someone's experience of hopelessness and depression and burnout, etc. So it's really important that the employer or the people in charge become aware that the mind is so powerful that, for people to perform, their mind actually needs to be functional. But if they're having mental health challenges, it's going to be so difficult for someone to actually be productive. And we need to really put this message out there that mental health illnesses or challenges or difficulties are something that can happen to someone, to anybody, because some people are predisposed to them. So we really need to promote the culture in society of seeking help, but also to show grace for people who are struggling, to understand that people are not wired the same, and really that if the mind is not functional, we cannot expect the body or the person to actually deliver. So we really need to really reduce the stigma around mental health illnesses, understanding that not everyone can just snap out of it. People are not, meant to snap out of these things, because it's actually sometimes a brain chemistry thing, meaning the neurotransmitters are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So people need intervention. Sometimes they need medication. Sometimes they need time off of the toxic environment.
Yeah. And I mean, you talk about the mind being so powerful. Having to know all of these things, I think a lot of people are now more educated around just some of the big stresses. I mean, with the world becoming so highly technical and technologically inclined, the world of AI and very hyper-connected, what then can businesses do to, create environments that are welcoming and also that, include people to have safe spaces, if I can call it that, because there are environments that are very much dangerous. SAPS, I would imagine also other environments, I can name a few, including journalists' environments. But what then can workplaces do to create those environments using technology to our advantage, to make people feel a little bit less stressed, if I can call it that?
Yeah, I think there is really a need to, create safe spaces, in that they should be, employee wellness. But, employee wellness also has its own limitations, in that people don't trust it. They don't want to use the internal, resources available. They would prefer external services. So that's also quite a tricky one, whereby you do, I think, mental health professionals should be identified, or there should be a list where people can choose those. So the employers need to really make sure that there's budget to cover for mental health illnesses, but not when there's a crisis. Just for people to have check-ins, to ensure that they can see their own blind spots, to have coping strategies in order to cope with life, but also with work, so that they can deliver. So it should be prioritized the same way we get people, have gyms in the workplaces. We really need to find ways to make it work. When it comes to AI, it's a bit difficult, because I think people still want the human element. Yeah. So even with online interventions, I know that my clients sometimes would wish to come see me physically. It's not always possible. So I can imagine also with AI, it's also quite difficult. But I think what we can do is just to demonstrate how the mind works. Because when I do my sessions, for example, in corporates, my aim is always to ensure that people understand how the mind works. And once you can master the art of how the subconscious works and how powerful it is, in that it determines your reality and your experience, and you take charge of that, instead of looking at it from a victim, perspective, but from a perspective that I need to understand this thing, because this mind is so powerful. It will determine how I finish in this life and my experiences, because I cannot control other things, but my mind definitely I can control. So I think it's really about empowering people to understand how the subconscious mind, which is 90% of the mind, influences our behaviors, our reactions, our actions, the things we say, the things we do with other people, how we relate with people, and actually begin to do the work within and have the courage to do that. But just also understanding the power that lies within understanding your own mind.
Absolutely. Dr. Mashego, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Dr. Keitumetse Mashego, a clinical psychologist there. Very important things as we observe, of course, Mental Health Awareness Month.